Hey, remember me? I'm back! Welcome back, guys. I have missed you so much. I am so happy to be back and to be filming. I cannot stress enough just how much I have missed sitting in this chair and talking to you guys. Right off the bat, I want to extend an immeasurable thank you to you. You flooded my last upload with so much love and support that I literally cannot thank you enough. You truly managed to make me feel so supported through a pretty scary point in my life. I really wish there was something that I could do to show each and every one of you just how grateful I am. I just feel so incredibly lucky to be surrounded by such a gracious and understanding community of people. I know I say it all the time, but you guys really are incredible. As for me, things are going really well, and hopefully by mid this month, any remaining questions should be answered. I know a lot of you have sent your positive energy and your thoughts and prayers my way, and I just want you to know that it is so incredibly appreciated. If you're new here, which I doubt because YouTube probably buried my channel when I stopped uploading, but just in case, hi, my name is Jessica, and I've been gone for a month. But that's in the past, and I'm here now, so welcome to my channel, where I explore new true crime or creepy history topics each week. If you have an interest in true crime or just the macabre in general, go ahead and subscribe to my channel down below. And with all that being said, let's go ahead and get into today's story. Surprise! I hope you don't mind, but today I thought I would kill two birds with one stone and get ready while I talk to you guys about today's story. I know most of you are well aware that this is not my usual order of operations, but from my research, I know that there are not a lot of photos or visual aids for me to add into today's video to kind of break up the monotony of just watching me talk. So I figured this would, at the very least, add some additional visual interest. Plus, I have ADHD, so chaotically doing a bunch of things at once under the guise of multitasking is basically my brand. So Portlock. Ever heard of it? Well, if not, it is a town in Alaska that's located on the tip of the Kenai Peninsula, and it was named after British ship captain Nathaniel Portlock, who sailed there in 1786. With that being said, please don't mistake this for him having discovered this land, because he didn't. Let's not whitewash this into another Christopher Columbus situation. Sidebar, fuck that guy. Am I right? Anyways, although the town as we know it today is named after Mr. Portlock, Aleut people lived on the southern tip of the Kenai Peninsula for many years before just droves of whiteys started showing up and settling all over their land. You know how 18th century white people were. Just terrible. But even through the arrival of the new settlers, Portlock remained a fairly peaceful and tranquil place to live. At first. The problem was that they couldn't just leave it that way. There's just simply no money to be made in that. So in 1912, industrialization began. Specifically with the construction of the region's first cannery, which was initially built as a means to preserve the town's surplus of fish, but it very quickly became much more than that. Because while you or I may not hear canning and think very much of it, if you're like me, you probably got 150 cans of green beans sitting in your pantry right now being taken for granted. But back then, this was like state-of-the-art technology. It was really something. This cannery very quickly took Portlock from a remote, peaceful, kind of off-the-beaten-path type of area and transformed it into an up-and-coming metropolis. Yeah, canning up they salmon turned out to be an incredibly successful and lucrative business venture. So much so that it gave Portlock the means to build a really sophisticated cold storage plant in 1915. This gave them somewhere to store even more salmon to be canned. Now, obviously, with all of these advancements, Portlock was able to offer a wide variety of new employment opportunities within the town. And this caused the population of Portlock to skyrocket over the next few years. By 1920, Portlock was well on its way to becoming like the next big thing in the commercial fishing industry. Things were going so well, in fact, that they even had to establish their own post office. Another thing that may sound super mundane to us, but back then to them was a really big deal. Portlock was thriving. Over the course of a decade, Portlock had really grown and evolved well beyond anyone's expectations. They built a super successful commercial fishing factory, which very quickly had to be replaced with an even bigger establishment because business was just booming. But sadly, it wouldn't last. Because, believe it or not, the population of Portlock, Alaska would plummet to almost zero, seemingly overnight. Portlock was last required to submit a count for a census in 1980, submitting a count of just 31 people. But bear in mind that they haven't been required to report their population for a census since then, and the town is often referred to as a ghost town because it is widely believed that there are few to no people still living there. So, what happened? I mean, why in the world would an entire town abandon their lives and most of their earthly possessions at the drop of a hat? Well, I'm here to tell you exactly why, and chances are it's probably not any of the reasons that you're thinking. While most populations dwindle due to lack of natural resources, wars, natural disasters, or political shenanigans, Portlock's story is just a whole other beast entirely. Reports of the phenomenon date all the way back to 1920, and they begin with a man named Albert Petka. Albert was just your average guy living his life on his boat near Portlock, when one day he decides he'd like to go fishing. He's hanging around, minding his own business, enjoying the fresh air and sunshine. He's letting his dogs run off their zoomies. I mean, it's just shaping up to be an all-around great day. That is, until his dogs abruptly stopped playing and defensively started barking and growling at something in the woods. Now, if you're a dog owner, you know that there's playful growling and barking that your dog will do, but that then there's that other bark. That bark that will immediately signal to you that something is not right. And this was that kind of bark. Something indeed was not right. So Albert stood up and started looking around. He was hoping that he could figure out exactly what had suddenly gotten his dogs all stressed out, but he didn't see anything. So he called out a few times. Maybe someone else was on their way out to go fishing and had just inadvertently startled his dogs. But even after Albert had called out multiple times, he received no answer. Understandably, this freaked him out a little bit, especially considering the fact that he too now felt as though he heard something moving through the woods. And not only was it there, but it sounded as though it was getting closer and closer and closer until it finally emerged from the woods. Albert was absolutely blown away by not just the size, but the sheer ferocity of the creature that now stood before him. Albert was later found brutally maimed and barely clinging to life by a fellow Portlock resident. He managed to weakly explain to this man that he had been attacked by a gigantic, hairy beast, that it had come out of the woods out of nowhere and just savagely beaten him within an inch of his life. His dogs had eventually managed to chase off the creature, but not before it had just absolutely brutalized Albert. So much so that he would eventually succumb to his injuries, leaving behind nothing but the town's first tales of what the native people refer to as the nanuk, or big hairy man. Now, I'm sure a lot of you are like, ugh, this is just folklore. But hold your eye rolls, because there's more. The next notable reports of this creature took place in the 1930s. A group of lumberjacks were out clearing trees, as you would expect lumberjacks to do. It's literally their job. Am I the only person that cannot hear the word lumberjack without immediately being filled with white-hot rage over the series finale of Dexter? Yeah, Showtime got a lot of work to do with this whole reboot situation. That's a lot of trauma to heal. Not the point, so back to our lumberjacks out lumberjacking. Just finishing up for the day when they realize that they're missing one of their guys. These men are tired. They've been out all day, working hard. They're ready to head back to town, hit the local tavern, unwind with a beer, and now freaking Jared's missing. So, begrudgingly, they head back out into the woods, hoping that they can quickly track him down and start to head home. But I guarantee you, none of these men were anticipating what they actually discovered when they did find Jared. Jared was laid out, unresponsive on the forest floor, with a very obvious and very severe-looking head wound. The men were shocked, to say the least. They frantically looked around, trying to piece together what may have happened here. But even after discovering blood on one of the pieces of logging equipment, they were still completely stumped. There was even a brief investigation launched into the circumstances surrounding Jared's death, but no definitive answers were ever collectively settled on. So to this day, no one truly knows what happened to him. But most people speculate that he too fell victim to the nanuk. Now, let's fast forward to 1943. A Portlock resident named John was camping in the woods when, out of nowhere, he was attacked from behind. Much like Albert, many years before him, John's dogs did manage to scare the assailant off, giving John just enough time to catch a glimpse of who or what had accosted him before it disappeared back into the forest. John was miraculously able to make it back into town and explain what had happened and what he'd seen. But despite frantic efforts to save his life, John did ultimately succumb to his injuries as well. Now, even though people are well aware at this point that some weird shit is going on, business was still thriving and money was still being made. So it was going to take a lot more than a couple of mysterious, one-off deaths to scare these people off of their land. Which brings us to 1949. A group of hunters head out into the woods to go hunting, but by nightfall they hadn't returned, which people found odd. While yes, it was odd, no one freaked out right away, but when they still hadn't returned by the following morning, that's when a group of townspeople decided that they should probably head out into the woods and see if they could find these men. And they found them. Pieces of them. They were dead. But when I say dead, I don't just mean normal dead. I mean their bodies had literally been ripped to shreds. But believe it or not, that was not the most confusing or shocking thing that the townspeople happened upon. Because at the scene of the carnage, they also found gigantic 18-inch human-like footprints surrounding the hunter's remains. These people are braver than me, I'll tell you that much, because rather than run for their lives right then, they decided maybe we should follow them. What's the worst that could happen? As if they weren't surrounded by bits and pieces of other human beings, showing them exactly what worst case scenario was. But they weren't scared, so I guess props to them. So they followed the footprints until they came to the scene of yet another obvious struggle. It looked like whatever had made these big-ass footprints had killed the hunters, walked to this point in the forest, and taken out some additional anger on either a bear or a moose. They really couldn't tell which. And you're probably thinking holy shit, I don't want to take on something that can take down a bear. But let me ask you this. Ever seen a moose? For size comparison, here's a bear, and here is a moose. Personally, I don't want to take on something that took down either, but I also wouldn't have followed the footprints. Hell, I wouldn't have been in the woods, so there's that. Anyways, from that point, the colossal footprints proceeded to head from that area and up a nearby mountain, which is where the townspeople decided that their investigation should probably end, and they headed back into town as fast as they possibly could. Once they returned, it did not take long for word of what they'd seen to spread through the town, and people were really shaken up by it. And from there, at an alarming rate, residents of Portlock started disappearing one by one, just poof, gone, never to be seen or heard from again. That is, unless they happened to be the bodies that were discovered mutilated floating in a nearby lagoon. So why was this happening? Well, my friends, it's believed that the nanuk was less than pleased with the industrialization of his once peaceful and tranquil land, and that because of this, the creature began to lash out at anyone who dared to stray too far onto his turf. Or her turf. Their turf. I don't know. So the issue at hand is now, what, pray tell, are the remaining residents going to do about it? Should they fight? Band together with pitchforks and torches and go after this thing head on, Beauty and the Beast style? Nope. They just decided, fuck it, let's bounce. And in the span of just 1 year, almost every single Portlock resident gathered up what little they could carry on their backs and relocated to surrounding towns. The only reports of happenings post-evacuation are from the town's postmaster, who I guess was contractually obligated to stay in town until the post office closed. And he described the experience as absolutely terrifying. He would see things moving through the forest. He would hear like inexplicably horrifying sounds just all the time. I mean, he was beyond ready to get the hell out of there at the first chance he got. And as the years passed, no one that fled Portlock during that evacuation has ever made any attempts to return. Not to mention, nor did like any future generations of their families. In fact, the only people who have really been to Portlock since this evacuation are people who have specifically gone in search of the nanuk. Even if more people wanted to go, which I don't really understand why you would, but for argument's sake, let's say you do. For the average person, it's not an easy place to access. The only way to reach Portlock is by boat or plane. You can't just drive up. It's a full-on commitment to actually go there. Some skilled survivalists claim to have been able to access it by ATV, but you better know exactly what you're doing because the surrounding terrain is no joke. You could get really hurt just trying to get there, let alone what you may come into contact with once you do get there. And while there are some people who are crazy enough to want to come face to face with the nanuk, there really aren't that many people who are jumping at the chance to try and get into Portlock. So there's really only a few like current photos of Portlock that even exist. And I say current with quotes because even the current photos really aren't all that current. I'd venture to say the most famous photo of Portlock is this one of just a lone remaining building. And it's eerie because it's believed that most, if not all, of the other buildings have collapsed in on themselves due to lack of upkeep. And honestly, beyond this photo, nobody really knows what's going on up there. Now, if you're a skeptic like me, it might be difficult for you to believe that Portlock residents really were under the threat of this like big Sasquatch-like creature. Especially considering the fact that while I don't believe that Sasquatch is supposed to be thought of as like Soup's outgoing and friendly, I do feel like he's more so thought of as elusive and difficult to locate. Not necessarily the type to aggressively jump out of the forest and kill anyone that he crosses paths with. Most photos don't even look particularly daunting. Even if you... Why am I trying to talk while I do this? But even if you think the story of Portlock is, at the very least, highly exaggerated, you cannot deny the fact that every single resident of that town up and abandoned their homes, their jobs, their possessions, their lives. And if not for this, for what? I've said it a million times through the course of this video, but I will say it again. Life and business in Portlock was incredibly successful, but they just ditched it all like that. And on top of that, these people and their families to this day still refuse to return. So regardless of what you specifically believe, I think we can all agree that something wild really did go down in Portlock, Alaska, right? Anyways, that about wraps it up for today. Please, for the love of God, if you're ever going to comment on any video I ever post, make it this one. I need to be influenced by other people's opinions because I am torn. With that being said, as always, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video and to listen to this story. And thanks for watching me get ready. Sorry if you hated it. Once again, please know that I really appreciate all of your love and support through my absence and that I am so happy to be back. If you haven't already and you'd like to, go ahead and subscribe to my channel down below. I put out new true crime or creepy history content each week, and I would love to catch you back here in my next video. Until then, stay safe and have a good week. Bye, guys.